Hey, Star Labs. I know I've said this many, many times, but I'm just going to do one more time. Star Labs, research venture I'm doing, very cool stuff. The whole idea is to pursue warp models, precisely explicit geometry warp models. What has been done so far? We got a paper in TCVPR, the 4D Vision Workshop, Physics and View Gaussians as a substrate for warp models. So now the next step is actually to build a model that utilizes that substrate, which is a much harder task, but it's also a very broad task with no clear definition because many people have a different definition for what warp model is and what I should be able to do. So what I've done is kind of create my own list of what the warp model Star Labs Pursuit should be able to do. Some of these are immediate things. Some of these are stuff eventually should be able to be done. Some of these could change in like a week or two or a month, right? So I'll just read it off. One is persistence, right? A world should persist beyond the media frame, right? So let's say I'm in this room and I leave the room, and I come back, I have not changed anything with the room, nor has any other entity, then the world, the room should still be the same, right? And I think this is where you can see why we don't pursue approaches like video-based warp models because it's there's some ways you can try and address that, but ultimately it's not persistent world, right? And I guess you can do maybe a combination of 3D and video, which is what some people are exploring. But nonetheless, I move on. Permanent changes. This is along the lines of persistent change. If I punch a wall in the cracks, that should stay the same. If I fracture something, topology changes. Those should work. Like if I tear a slice of bread, it shouldn't just like if I bring them together, it shouldn't just become bread again, right? That's not how bread works to some degree. Another thing is also transfer of energies, things like heat transfer. That's an immediate thing that the physics and Gaussian substrate from Star Labs is able to do. So really glad we have that done. But also just heat transfer of energy in general. So think stuff like turn on lights or speed or anything like that. Anything where energy transfers and has some impact is something a warp model should be able to represent in some way. And this is kind of goes on to the thing in my next point when I said the light thing. I do think a warp model should be able to have consistent mechanical interactions, right? So whether it be with door handles, whether it be with interacting with other objects, the interactions, if the same object, should not change. And it kind of goes back to the same thing of persistence. But think about it like this: let's say you're in a hotel with a bunch of doors, right? All the doors are the same, right? So if I open one door and I open another door, I open another door, they should all operate under the same laws. They should all operate the same. Um, that's something a world model should do. Do video based. I feel like I'm always like throwing shit at video based approaches. Do they do this? To some degree, yes, but if you stress testing enough, probably not. So that's something to consider, and that's something that this approach has to be able to do. Whatever approach we take has to be able to do. Another thing, this is where it comes into like, oh, just some ideas, but reflections is something I think for a world model to be used in consumer-based applications should be able to work, right? It doesn't seem like it doesn't seem intuitive. Like, oh, how many times I actually looking at a mirror, but like just reflecting in general is something that matters. And I think it's weird because the substrate we're using is a Gaussian substrate. So like, how well does reflections even work with Gaussians? I haven't really seen anything along that lines. Maybe it works really easily. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe that's a vicious direction. Who knows? Yeah, a bit harder though. This is really the tricky one, and this is what I mean. Maybe months down the line or years down the line, but chemical change is something that I do think a warp model should be able to represent in some form. So something immediate that comes to mind is frying a piece of egg. Like you break an egg and you put in a pan and you fry it. There are chemical changes there, right? And those changes change the egg, right? And it can go back to being back in an egg. Um, and as such, there should be some way to represent that. I also do think this is where it comes. This is where my mentality. I question it because how much of it's getting into the weeds. I think Jan McCune actually had a really good point about this, and how much is actually relevant to stuff like this. And to be fair, I think Jan LeCun is more so thinking along the lines of robotics. And when I think about world models, I think more along the lines of consumer-based applications, even though I see the immediate applications in robotics, but stuff like that do matter. I do think eventually should be able to be done. I don't think it's impossible. I just think it's very hard, right? It's very hard, but eventually that's something that should be able to be done. Is it going to be something I'm doing immediately with Star Labs? Definitely not. But eventually. Another thing is temporary changes. Think elastic bodies. If you bounce a ball the ball deforms for a bit, but still comes back to its original body or original shape. That's something the world model should be able to do. Dynamic acceleration. The reason I say this, and I'm very specific, is that when my team and I were looking at the how we're going to pursue this world model, we found a really good paper from DeepMind on graph neural networks and using them to model complex physics, and it seemed really really great. But there were still there were a couple of shortfalls, stuff like dynamics acceleration, which could technically be implemented given certain if you do certain things, but that's just not a given with the work. Um, but dynamic acceleration, the whole idea is that acceleration isn't constant. You should be able to do stuff like dynamic acceleration and change acceleration given a certain action. And I feel like, gosh, okay. So basically, the thing, back to what I was saying, with the graph neural network approach, what they would do is that the final output was basically predicting acceleration of an object. And from acceleration, you could get different stuff like velocity and position. So if I was to drop this, right, then it's like, okay, you just predict acceleration and you can do the rest. But then that's a really simple motion. But when you get into more complex motions, that's where dynamic acceleration becomes important, right? But that's really it. There's probably more stuff I'm forgetting. There's probably some stuff that I should probably remove. It's not necessary. But I think as we're in a very fundamental stage of figuring out what architecture we want to build upon, then these are the stuff I have to ask myself: can this architecture in some way do this, right? Some is an easy yes. Others is a hard no. So it's really gonna be an interesting thing. It's like, where do we find it? Is there gonna be a hybrid approach? Is it gonna be completely novel? I'm very excited. I obviously know that the road ahead isn't as clear and it's going to be challenging to some degree, but it's just so exciting. So, besides that, I have nothing else to say. So, have a great day.